Welcome back to another in the series of SkySwitch webinars. I'm Andy Abramson, and I have the good pleasure, the good fortune, and the real joy to host these every so often as we pull together the SkySwitch community of resellers far and wide all across North America, and some of our closest and most valued partners in our ecosystem. Today, we're going to make sure that you have access to some of the best information when it comes to ordering from the SkySwitch store from one of our truly valued SkySwitch store partners. That's TeleDynamics. That's why we work with them. They're a value-added B2B distributor of SIP and telecom products. TeleDynamics is a channel-only distributor for authorized VARs and ITSPs, just like you, just like all of you in the SkySwitch community. And TeleDynamics offers our SkySwitch resellers high-end white glove provisioning services, a robust API interface, and live tech support to help accommodate everything you and your customers need. We're happy today to talk about our webinar because you're going to learn just more about who is TeleDynamics, a full overview of what's in their product catalog, how their customized order processing works within the SkySwitch store, and of course, how provisioning services work between TeleDynamics, SkySwitch, and the API order interface, whether you go through the SkySwitch store or if you have special requests and need to work directly with TeleDynamics. Today's webinar is going to offer you a much better way to understand exactly what TeleDynamics can offer all of you as SkySwitch resellers. And joining us for today's webinar, along with myself, is Daniel Norotsky. He's the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer at TeleDynamics, and we're really lucky to have him. TeleDynamics is a nationally recognized wholesale distributor of telecom equipment. Daniel has a strong product knowledge and understanding VoIP systems, as well as legacy integration, which is really important for you because we know that all of your customers are not running the latest and greatest technology and may not have the latest and greatest hardware connected to the SkySwitch network. In Daniel's current post, he's responsible for all the strategic sales, managing key accounts, product purchasing, and working with the various manufacturers that TeleDynamics represents that are available in the SkySwitch store. And of course, IPPBX implementation and technical support. Daniel's an expert in telecommunications, especially TDM, as well as IP endpoint devices. That's more than just phones. That's headsets, that's conference phones, that's paging accessories, everything you need to know about unified communications and how to transition people from legacy services to IP solutions. Daniel constantly develops relationships with the industry's leading vendors and manufacturers, which provides TeleDynamics resellers with the largest assortment of the most recognized and trusted VoIP and TDM products. With that, without any further ado, here's Daniel.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate the introduction. Just a brief intro to myself. My background was actually in pre-medicine. I have a biology degree that I no longer use. I was en route to medical school and saw a change in the industry with medicine. That was almost 15 years ago. And so 15 years now, I've been in the industry of telecommunications. I've been working with TeleDynamics for that 15-year length. So in our industry, it's kind of not normal, I guess, to see somebody that has tenure at one position. But I've been with TeleDynamics for 15 years. And as you said, a strong product knowledge and understanding the legacy to VoIP transition. I also produce a weekly blog for TeleDynamics. We call it our Think Tank, and it is specifically on industry news and hot topics. So at the end of this webinar, I'll provide a link to that as well. So I think the SkySwitch channel could find some good use there. A lot of information, a lot of it is how to, but a lot of it's even just good details on the current events that are going on within our industry.
That's great, Daniel. Why don't you take everybody through what you're going to talk about today?
Sure. So today's agenda, I want to give a brief overview of who TeleDynamics is, cover some of the customized order processing that we have within the SkySwitch store, talk about the provisioning services and our API order interface, and then how we can stay relevant with the current situation that's going on in our supply chain, and how we can stay relevant with the products and services that you're being offered through TeleDynamics, but also how that can help you with your SkySwitch business. And then lastly, we'll put our information online of how we can connect if you have any questions or need to follow up with me after this webinar.
That's great. Why don't you give us a little background about TeleDynamics and where your company's based, what you do, and talk a little bit more about your integration with SkySwitch.
Absolutely. So TeleDynamics is a wholesale hardware distributor. We were founded in May of 1981. We're located in Austin, Texas. And as you had mentioned earlier, we are a B2B distributor, so a business-to-business distributor. And with that, we specialize in voice. So that's why we say communication is our language. We have anything from the analog telecom products through the transition to hosted voice SIP endpoints. And as far as the interface with SkySwitch, we've had an API that we've had out in development for probably 25, 30 years now of working with back-end connections. And so we've integrated with the SkySwitch portal. So when a SkySwitch reseller customer logs into the SkySwitch store, they can see the TeleDynamics product, they can see the pricing, they can see the availability. And so that's going to be important as you're looking through the portal to be able to see who has the product, what the price is, and you're going to see TeleDynamics in there as well. So it's been great for us to be able to integrate with the portal, not just to have that entry level information of what's available and the cost, but also to have that back end provisioning services available. So when you want to provision phones and have us flash those phones with the SkySwitch provisioning URL, we'll make sure the MAC addresses are sent back through the API to the SkySwitch team as well. So the MAC addresses are there in immediate use for provisioning the phones to the servers. And then we provide that blind drop shipping. So that looks like it's coming directly from that customer source, not from TeleDynamics. And it goes right to that customer if you need it to that end user. And it doesn't have any pricing on it. Doesn't have anything that would show any of our information on that. So the blind drop shipping is a feature that we have as well. And then most importantly, same day shipping until 5 o'clock Central. So you log into the store, put your order in, and at 5 o'clock Central, you still hit send, hit order, and it'll still be processed same day.
Does being in the central part of the United States really benefit you guys from a shipping standpoint, especially at costs?
Cost is a big factor today, and everything has a cost, even just the part of owning warehouse space. And so with TeleDynamics, we have central warehouses in Austin, Texas, and for the majority of the United States, we are a 2-day shipping to the majority. And then on the outskirts, the far West Coast, far East Coast, we're at 3-day shipping. So being central really does help us neutralize our costs on owning warehouse, but also neutralizes costs that we have to push forward in shipping costs, freight costs.
Give us a brief history about the business and why it got started and how it all ties together with everything going on in communications.
Would love to. So brief history, in the pre-1970s, services and hardware were supplied by the telco. So when you ordered your phone line, you also were renting your piece of hardware that would terminate that line into your business or your house. And in 1978, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, regulated for OEM manufacturers to have devices that would be supported by the telco. So now you could purchase that piece of hardware and you could then connect it to that telco service. So in the early 1980s, modular connections were approved for these OEM devices to easily allow them to connect to telcos. So this was your 4-pin, 4-conductor Cat3 jack. So as we kind of moved through the 80s and into the 90s, this began the adaptation of the modern phone. And I just love that graphic on the right there, just the adaptation. We've seen the phones go from old analogs to digital systems, to key systems, to hybrid systems, to fully VoIP endpoints. And now even with cellular phones, you're not even connected to anything local. Everything is remote now. So the adaptation began in the 90s, and we're living in the adaptation still today.
Wasn't that the breaking point where people no longer had to rent their phones from the Bell system operators and they were able to begin to buy phones of their own back in 78?
That's exactly correct. In 1978, when the FCC regulated that OEM manufacturers could now build devices that you could purchase and own instead of rent, that started changing the industry. And Happy Feller, the owner of TeleDynamics, saw that. He was working for the Bell system in 78. And he made that suggestion to the Bell system saying, hey, we really should sell equipment. I think we're missing out on a large scale production here if we could sell equipment. And they didn't believe that was a good transition. And so in 1981, he founded TeleDynamics.
And the rest, as they say, is history, because now everybody, I don't know anybody who rents a phone from the phone company anymore. I mean, it's kind of very old school, but that back then you had your, your straight set, your 6-button phone. If you were a business, you had things like trimline phones and wall phones, and you got a bill every month and it was tacked onto your phone bill. That was all pre-divestiture.
That's right. There was no such thing as a capital expense at that point.
No, everything was, well, no such thing as an operating expense. You mean everything was CapEx?
Well, it was all operating expense at that point because it was all part of your.
Right. Oh, you're right. You're right. But for the phone company, it was CapEx because they capitalized those assets. For
That's
the buy,
correct.
for the end user, it was an operational expense.
Yes.
But the Bell system on their balance sheet was showing, millions of endpoints that they were capitalizing and amortizing over a 7-year period. It totally changed things in 78 and again in 1984 when Judge Green broke up the Bell system.
Exactly right. So that allowed in 78, that ruling allowed for the end users to choose whether they needed a CapEx or OpEx. And again, you saw that large transition of phone and OEMs, suppliers, manufacturers building devices. And so you saw that migration start to happen.
And that was all, then VoIP came along.
Yeah. So again, when we go from your analog POTS lines, and then you had your T1s and E1s, and PRI finally came around. So digital was king for a while. And then SIP trunks come along and really start displacing a lot of the analog. And as we've continued that transition to cloud, now we have everything is hosted. And so the SIP trunks and hosted have really shaken up the industry since the 70s, if you will.
They really have. And the whole world changed with the invention of voice over IP back when it was even H.323. And then, of course, when Enig and everyone else got involved and created the concept of SIP, it really changed the world.
Absolutely. And SIP has been one of those standards that you see it in today, and you can see it in the transition of where TeleDynamics hardware lies as far as what we've stocked. We don't see too many of the old rotary phones or quack phones from the 80s anymore. There are a couple of neat manufacturers that do manufacture some analog replicas, but as you can see now, the VoIP phones have been the hot item, the endpoint of preference for the last 5 to 10 years. And of course, we've seen them even in that status continue to grow and add features and to become more relevant in technology.
Daniel, with all the changes in VoIP and SIP, what are some of the endpoints that, the phones and that you offer that you see is really defining the market today?
I think the things defining the market today, if we just loosely use the word endpoint, because they're all, again, with SIP and with this transition to SIP, they're all endpoints hanging off of some solution, whether it's a hosted solution or whether it's some sort of a hybrid solution with the way that the world is today, with some are partially local, partially remote. With endpoints, you've got your phones, right? Those are the desk phones. They could be Wi-Fi phones. They could be cordless DECT, DECT, DECT phones. So the phone is an important end piece. We also see with the use of soft phones, whether that's on the PC or even possibly on a cell phone, that headsets are an important endpoint. So headsets were extremely important in March of 2020 when everybody went to working from home. That was probably the #1 commodity sold in March and April were headsets. And then lastly, I think your paging peripherals, your paging servers and door access, door entry, those are probably that third commodity that are very important with hosted endpoints.
And are those services so meaningful because UCaaS has become so predominant in the business world today? Is that what's driving it?
Not only that, that is a big part of it, with UCaaS being predominantly the migration of the phone system, you're really not seeing as many hosted, or excuse me, on-prem systems anymore. Most people are moving hosted. And so with that, you still have some of the analog systems in place. So in hotels, for example, you have some of those analog property management servers in place. You have the elevator phones that need to be connected to still. Most old hotels are using analog copper lines to run to each of the rooms. And of course, with FCC regulations, with stairwells and things like that, you still need paging for emergency. And so all of these connection points come back to how do we connect those to hosted. So it's not just the endpoint, it's not just that phone, it's how do we connect it to everything that's going on in that enterprise or at that end user location. So that's why I say it's really an endpoint overall. It could be a phone, a headset, a paging server, and a gateway to communicate all those in between.
That's fantastic. What do you think is happening historically that says what we're doing is we're moving back, not in technology, but in the same type of migration path? If you look at unified communications today, what's unified today in cloud was hosted or premise PBX in the past. How's history repeating itself?
Great segue. History does have a tendency to repeat itself. And if we look at where pre-COVID hosted UC seats were making up about 22% of the unified communication services market. And in 2019, just before COVID, we were almost at 50% adoption rate of the UC hosted seats or PBXs. So almost everything in 2019 was moving in the direction of hosted. Well, when COVID hit, that tended to amplify and put pressure on this need to have the ability to be remote. And so when we just look at the historical data of what was happening pre-COVID, we saw the need for everything going kind of back to the telcos or going back to the service providers, if you will. And this is where SkySwitch sees itself being in a perfect place. But not only that, it was kind of this mind shift of that CapEx, OpEx model of, well, in the 70s or late 70s, 80s and 90s and early 2000s, you could purchase that hardware and connect it up. But now we see a lot of people wanting to go back to that monthly rental program. So it's kind of this history repeats itself. No more do you have to purchase the hardware and put it on there. You can go back to a month-to-month rental.
But who wants to go back to month-to-month rentals? I mean, it's good for the service provider, it's good for the rental company, but at a certain point in time, you've bought and paid for the device. How many times over? Unless you cycle through like some of the new iPhone deals, if you play it smartly, you get a phone, $1,000 phone for about $360 because you keep renewing every year.
That's exactly correct. And so the people that are looking for the month-to-month rentals, there's a couple of factors in it. You see that the warranty period is extended out for at least 3 times the length in month-to-month rentals, because you're trading that phone in, you're upgrading technology contractually just because you're month-to-month now. So you don't have an outright CapEx expense to purchase the equipment. So that helps the smaller businesses that are startup companies that can understand their own budgets and can understand their own operating expenses, get into the newest technology and have some of that latest SIP hardware at their fingertips without having to spend thousands to tens of thousands of dollars to put that CapEx up front. But again, I think like you said, it's really those that are in the industry that are looking for the growth. And again, COVID slowed this down a little bit on the hardware side, but we had a lot of growth coming up to 2020 where we had phones that were changing, features that were changing. We had a lot of new devices coming on where we had SIP phones that were now integrating their Android screen. So you could have some touchscreen Android devices. We had Wi-Fi being put into phones now. And these were things that maybe 3-4 years ago, if you had purchased your phones outright, those features weren't available yet. So that's where we see some of the need, where you see a lot of companies that are building in their own leasing programs.
Daniel, you're familiar with the term curb appeal. It's got, how it has to do with something looking really good from the curb, a house, a car, a swing set, a patio set. And a lot of offices, a lot of law firms, accounting firms, advertising agencies that would bring clients into the office were very prudish and very smart about making sure all the appointments in their offices, the furniture, the paintings, the artwork, the phones were all very current, very modern, very trendy. With more work from home, are you seeing any type of shift in how businesses are buying gear that used to be there to be a showpiece versus practical?
Absolutely. I think the easiest upfront thing to look at was when you would walk into a law office or maybe even anything in the healthcare field. You would typically see this large 20 by 30 room that was a conference room, and it had a video conferencing system set up in there, and it would have some pretty large flat screen there, and typically, if we look 10 years ago, these were all point-to-point systems. So you had a 20, 30, $40,000 set of hardware in your office, and then somebody else had to have the exact same system in their office. As UC grew and SIP became the more prevalent way of connecting these video conferencing systems, the costs came down. People could now have more personalized devices instead of large conference rooms. And then with the work from home and the work remote and even the hybrid remote, sometimes at home, sometimes at the office, the need to have a more mobile solution and more personal solution that you could be anywhere for those video conference calls. You can see that's less of a curb appeal in the traditional conference room setting now.
And as a result, how is that how are buyers making decisions on what they're buying?
Yeah, I think the biggest trend that we see is buyers are in twofold. If they know that they are getting out of the commercial real estate space, and so they're downsizing office size, and more people are working from home, and that's going to be the company goal is to work from home. More people are downsizing and having more of a customized, personalized device that they can use, whether that's a personal conference phone, a smaller desk phone. They don't want the big real estate sitting on their desk at home. Those that are still in that hybrid, so they're half remote, half in the office, they're having to make the decision of, are they going to have two pieces of hardware, something to leave at their home office and something to leave at the local office, or do they need some sort of a mobile device that they can carry back and forth depending on the employee? And so you see that transition trend in what they're purchasing based on what we're living today. Are we remote? Are we hybrid? And what type of employee is it? Is it an executive? Is it a key systems employee, or is it somebody that's it's kind of works in the back office from time to time? They really don't need the flashy curb appeal phone.
Right. And so what do you think is going to lead to the next wave of devices, and how are businesses going to really approach them going forward?
With the way that hardware is going right now, we've in my industry, in the distribution world, we have heard from experts in the industry that desk phones would eventually go away. The desk phones would no longer be needed with the rise of cell phones. Cell phones are completely smarter than the first laptops that we had in the 90s, right? So cell phones have so much more power in our pockets than ever, but that really hasn't limited desk phone sales. And then we were also hearing with the move to Teams and the move to soft phones that the desk phone would die. We see today more desk phone sales. Of course, they're all IP now versus what they were analog years ago, but we see more desk phone sales today than we've ever seen before. So that tells me that the trend that we all thought we would see, where the desk phone would die, is not coming anytime soon. Now, while that might be a potential future for the desk phone, that you might no longer have desk phones, maybe people will have headsets moving forward in the next 5 to 10 years. I think where we're looking at in the world of distribution, I think we're looking at those integration pieces is kind of the hardware to keep our eyes on. Right now, it's gateways, and this is a good transition into our next segment too. But with gateways, this is transferring your SIP protocol over to an analog protocol. So you could have fax machines or analog rooms in a hotel, things like that. The gateway piece, as we continue to migrate and softwares continue to advance and UC continues to implement these new softwares, gateways are becoming more and more relevant in making sure that the existing infrastructure that's there, the existing hardware, can communicate with this ever advancing UC software.
Well, that's a very good segue into the whole idea of staying relevant with regards to transportation and logistics. How has the global logistics crisis impacted TeleDynamics and your customers?
Yeah, so in order to stay relevant on the current situation, we need to take a look back at when this pandemic hit, before it actually became a pandemic, when it was just locally regionalized in China. This came in 2019, right around the Lunar New Year. So you had most manufacturing warehouses and manufacturing plants closed down for Chinese New Year. And then you had the local epidemic hit with COVID in 2019. So we had almost an entire month of warehouse production completely shut down in China. And again, most manufacturing is done in China. So that really had a small trickle effect in the early 2020 stages. And before that became a pandemic, that really started affecting when workers could get to the docks in China to ship things out once their production started back up. So we were looking at probably April of 2020 when things started moving again. But as a distributor who's done this for 40 years, you see that 4 months slowdown from a 4-week hiccup just from a regional epidemic. So we had the foresight to look at that, bulk up on our forecasts, and say if anything like this happens again, if there's any kind of a closure or trickle down, there could definitely be some issues. And so it was early 2020 we started bulking up our local stock. And so to move that forward to what that means today, where we are with supply chain issues, Andy, we're looking at the cost to ship from China to the United States is 400% higher today than it was a year ago. So the cost to bring product to the US is 400% higher. So I think it's really relevant for anybody that's in the supply chain, and that's all of our SkySwitch channel, to understand that the cost of moving goods in is increasing. And so I think to know that on the front end, if your customers are purchasing hardware for you, if you're selling that hardware to the customer, they're seeing the price increase. And this is one of the biggest factors moving it right now, just the cost to get it here. Luckily, TeleDynamics has tried to stay on the front end of that and has been months and months, almost a year ahead of the curve in making sure that stock came in, that we had warehouse in Austin full of the primary moving products. But knowing that moving forward, this is not going to end anytime soon. We've got you've all seen the news. We've got a backup and a backlog of containers that are on the West Coast that are just waiting to be put on the ports. And then once they're on the ports, they sit there for a few months because we have a backlog of truck drivers to get those containers to bring them into the US. So one of the things that we've tried to do is we're in Austin, Texas. So we've been using the port of Houston and Galveston to bring in our containers. So we've tried to get around that West Coast backlog. So again, we haven't had too many containers stuck in limbo out on the West Coast. We've really tried to use our geographic location to move stuff to where we need it.
So with that in mind, with that in mind, Dan, the shipping issue, how is that affecting in North America though? You've got product. Are you seeing any slowdown in shipping going to the resellers?
So we do have some delay in coming to us. And then what we see is from shipping from us to the resellers, during COVID, we saw UPS and FedEx cancel all of their guarantees. and they said, hey, we can't guarantee anything is going to be overnight or 2-day. We're just going to do as best we can. And so we saw that during the middle of the pandemic, and it was just released. I think it was last week. It might have been the week before last. So don't hold me to which week it was. I've been traveling with a couple of events, but about a week or so ago, FedEx released that they're dropping their guarantees again over the holiday period. So we are seeing that the shipping, even internal within the continental US, is being delayed a little bit.
And I saw UPS has even put out their own holiday shipping schedule, and looking at it and recognizing, of course, that this year we're going to see Christmas is a Saturday, New Year's is a Saturday, Christmas Eve is a Friday. They've pulled it up a little tighter, but not as much as you would have expected. So they're telling everybody ship by this date. They've built in a little bit of cushion, but I can tell you, walking by, I live in Las Vegas, and walking by the UPS store where I go to when I have to ship stuff, they are moving massive amounts of boxes. I talk to, I'm one of these persons who likes to talk to the UPS drivers. I say, how's it looking this year? And they go, it's going to be big. They're already seeing the early onslaught of shipping. So for our resellers who are looking to buy, who know they're going to need product, get your orders in with TeleDynamics. They've got the inventory, but don't get caught up in the shipping delays that may occur.
Yeah, and not only that, it's not really part of the supply chain per se, but exactly, if you're looking and you know that you have a job, maybe it's going to be the end of November or mid-December, just because we have stock today does not mean we might have it in 3 to 6 weeks. You've got to take a look at, if you have a very strategic customer that you've been working on this quote with them for a few months, take a look at stock. If stock's available today, you might think about going ahead and purchasing that today, not just because of how long the shipping might take, but because with all of the supply chain shortages hitting every other distributor, there's a lot of people looking for product right now. So I would just kind of caution that, stay relevant, stay in front of your customers, take a look at your ability to order that, and it might be 3 weeks earlier than you wanted. But if that's an important customer to go ahead and close, you might consider that.
Why don't you talk a little bit about the brands you represent and who you have inventory available on that's available through the SkySwitch store?
Absolutely. So just a quick overview. I won't read all of them off, but you can obviously see these on your screen. Yealink is by far our largest brand. We are Yealink's largest distributor in North America. We are sitting pretty good on almost all Yealink phones and headsets and conference phones. There are a couple of models that are back ordered, but we've tried to do everything we could to even air freight some of those in, just to make sure that we're trying to stay ahead of that and keep our heads above water. But most everything from Yealink is in stock. Same with Grandstream. Grandstream is mostly in stock. The things that we're seeing as hard to get items, if you will, are those gateways, like I mentioned earlier. That's one of the key components to integrate hardware to that software. And so we're seeing the gateways, ATAs, those things are hard to get, but mostly everything else from Grandstream's in stock. And then from the rest of what we're dealing with the SkySwitch channel, the Plantronics headsets, CyberData paging servers and equipment, Jabra headsets. So those are the key lines I think that we're working with in the store. But everything else that you see on your screen, if there's something that is not integrated in the store, that's why I say feel free to give us a call. If there's something that you might need that's not integrated at the store, let us know. Ask us. If it's communication related, we deal with it.
That's good. So we appreciate, the fact that you carry so many of the products that work with SkySwitch, Yealink, Grandstream, obviously Poly and Plantronics, Jabra, Snowem. These are all, brands that have been, integrated with SkySwitch and that work with SkySwitch and are available through SkySwitch store.
Absolutely. And we've got a great relationship with the team over at SkySwitch. And so as new hardware is being tested and looked at as a possibility, we always have those recommendations saying, hey, we're testing this. Would you consider picking that up? And the answer is always absolutely. So if there's something that that you guys are hearing in the field that you've talked to your SkySwitch account reps with and say, hey, would you consider this? And if they start looking it over, they'll come to us and let us know if it's worth distribution, and we'll look at picking that up. So that's a great way that from channel to SkySwitch to TeleDynamics, we are all integrated, and we do have those conversations frequently.
So Daniel, if people want to get in touch with you, how do they find you?
You're more than welcome to email me directly, call me directly. That's my direct number. You can text that number as well. And the last link there on the site is the blog that I mentioned earlier. You can read those blogs, you can comment on those blogs, so you can catch me on pretty much any one of those media platforms.
It's great. Daniel, we want to thank you. We want to thank TeleDynamics for being a valued partner and participant, not only on today's webinar, but in the SkySwitch store for the past few years. We look forward to seeing you and the team of TeleDynamics Vectors the end of March in Orlando. It's going to be a big event. For our resellers, if you haven't signed up yet, take advantage of the early bird opportunity, $395. It's going to run for a few more days, but let's get your registrations in before it bumps up to the next price point. And we'll see you, Daniel, the TeleDynamics team, all the resellers who are with us today, and everybody listening in the future. We'll see you on the next webinar. We'll see you at Vectors. Thanks for being part of the SkySwitch team, everybody. Have a great day.